I think many of Le Pen's followers, I'd be interested to know if John agrees with this, will see this as an act of the establishment, will see this, and indeed have said this, that it is an anti-democratic act. And I think, the French democracy is at the moment in a pretty fragile state.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. Today we're going to be talking about a big story that has broken in France today, and that is that Marine Le Pen, currently the favourite, or has up until today I should say, the favourite to be the next French president, has been found guilty of embezzling European Union funds and banned from running for political office for 5 years, which will mean she cannot, under this ruling, she will not be able to compete in the next French presidential election. To discuss this potentially enormous story, I'm delighted to be joined by John Keiger, who is a Spectator contributor and a writer about France and Europe, and the historian Robert Tombs. John, I'll start with you. I believe that Marine Le Pen was expecting to be found guilty, but was perhaps not expecting to be banned from running. Is that your understanding? And how big a story is this?
That is correct. In fact, they've been playing down, the whole of the Rassemblement National and Madame Le Pen have been playing down what impact this all might have. However, even they were remarkably surprised at the result. And I think that's shown by the fact that Marine Le Pen actually walked out of, while the judge was giving her sentence, she actually walked out before the end, which was seen certainly by the French media as her self-composure dropping, falling apart, and secondly, her annoyance, her rage even that this should have happened.
And John, just sticking with you for one more question, how final is this? I mean, she can appeal and presumably have the decision overturned.
Yes, but the French law on this is a little bit particular in that whilst waiting for appeal, the sentence will be applied. So she will automatically and immediately come under all of these things. Certainly her eligibility is suspended. So she will immediately have to stand down as a local official in the one of the northern departments. She will have to stand down immediately. So will all the other people who are found guilty and who have been given what's called an arrêt provisoire on all of their activities. So it is extremely serious.
Robert, we're seeing this more and more in Western democracies now. Popular figures who may be unpopular with parts of the establishment being pursued by the legal system, and it obviously strikes a lot of people as corrupt and unfair. From your reading, how corrupt and unfair is this case?
Well, I think there's no doubt that she is guilty of what she's charged. Whether that is a sufficient explanation, I'm not sure. But let's say I think many people will doubt it. I think many people would not think that using EU funds for a purpose to which they are not explicitly intended is not much of a crime, as the European Parliament and the EU itself are notoriously lax about the use of funds. And what she did in this case, as we know, is to have people who are on the EU payroll, in a sense, doing other things. Now, I may be cynical, but I suspect that is not an uncommon thing for politicians who are EU members of the EU Parliament to do. So the question would be why now and why her? And therefore, I think whatever you think about the gravity of what she did, I think I would say that it's not just a matter of how serious a corruption or how serious an offence, but how dangerous is this as an act of the French courts. Now, the French courts, the judge and the court may have acted entirely independently. And the French courts have a record of being pretty robust in dealing with delinquent politicians. I sometimes wish ours were a bit more so, but they do put politicians in prison I don't know when the last British politician to go to prison for a political offence was, which in a sense this is. And I would have said that it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous for the law to be seen, or the courts to be seen as taking an action which has huge political consequences. And it's also possibly counterproductive. I'm sorry, I'm saying what's obvious now, but we saw this with Trump, as you said, and it made Trump probably stronger. I think many of Le Pen's followers, I'd be interested to know if John agrees with this, will see this as an act of the establishment, will see this, and indeed have said this, that it is an anti-democratic act. And I think, the French democracy is at the moment in a pretty fragile state. It seems to me dangerous that this should have happened.
Well, John, do you agree with that? And also, I mean, given that we do normally see we've seen with Trump and with others, a popular reaction against these legal decisions. Will that apply to Marine Le Pen, or will it be a case for Rassemblement National that they will be another figure, for instance, Jordan Bardella, likely seen as her replacement? Will he gain from this, or will Marine just get stronger herself?
It's already beginning to happen that the French public, and certainly politicians that you would never have expected to have sided with Marine Le Pen, are beginning to side with her. So just on the popularity to begin with, ironically, there was a poll that came out day before yesterday in France, which puts Marine Le Pen on 37% for the first round of the presidential elections. So that is a remarkable score. I mean, just to put it in some kind of context, when François Mitterrand and when Sarkozy, who were the most popular presidents that there had been in the previous period, when in the first round they went into the competition for the presidentials, they only got around about 33-34%. So she would be one of the most popular politicians that there has been as president of the French Republic. The second thing is that those people who are beginning to side with her are people like Jean-Luc Mélenchon and members of the extreme left, the center. Now, the government has sent out a tweet today, apparently, telling every member of the government that they must make no comment about this whatsoever, either on social media or in the media in general. So you can see that there's an attempt to control this, which I think is beginning to surprise in its breadth and its depth, even the government in power.
Mm. And of course, the finger of suspicion points inevitably, doesn't it, Robert, towards Emmanuel Macron. Obviously, the legal system is supposed to be separate from the presidency in France. But as with Trump and Biden, Biden, of course, was head of the Department of Justice, but there was supposed to be no involvement from Biden in Trump's persecutions, but everybody suspected that there was. To what extent do French people suspect that Macron is behind this, and what evidence is there that they're right?
Well, I think they certainly will think that. Whether it's true or not, of course we don't know, and we may never know. But the French judiciary is unlike the British judiciary, and the British judiciary have shown themselves able to do some pretty extraordinary things in recent years. If one's thinking about the extension of judges' political interventions. But in France, the judiciary is, in a sense, a politicized body. It's the appointments of judges. It is a profession in a sense. It's part of the civil service, and so promotions and so on are dependent on to some extent on behavior. So one couldn't say that the French judiciary is entirely separated from political considerations. But I don't know, John will know better than I, but I mean, I think it's quite possible that this is something that the prosecutors and the judges themselves are very eager to do as being part of a generally fairly liberal establishment, and who are certainly not averse to taking the opportunity to put a spoke in the wheels of a movement which they think is extremely dangerous for France. And of course, they might be right about that. It's none of us knows what would happen if the Rassemblement National ever actually came, or the Ralliement National ever actually came to power. it could mean a huge shock to the whole French system. So one can imagine that many people in positions of authority who are themselves sympathetic towards the centre or the centre left would think that this is a jolly good way of putting a stop to a very dangerous woman and a very dangerous movement. But the thing that worries me as a as a French citizen as well as a British citizen is that the shock effect on the whole French system will certainly be unpredictable.
Yes, and the French judiciary, I'm afraid, does have form on this. As some of you may remember, or some of the listeners and will remember, in 2013, the media got into one of the trade unions because French judges are trade unionized, and got into one of their staff rooms where they had a series of photographs on the wall of the Syndicat de la Magistrature of all of the people under what they called the Mur des Cons, which translated rather euphemistically means the wall of bastards. And on that were a number of right-wing politicians and other people of the right, intellectuals and others. And this became widely known. And ever since, the French in general have a rather jaundiced view of the impartiality of their judges. And so that ironically occurred at the same time as this story was beginning to develop in the European Parliament. So there is some concern that the judges are not that impartial. And of course, Monsieur Macron recently appointed a new president of the Constitutional Council, which could in some ways intervene in this whole process towards the end. But this person that he appointed is a total Macroniste of the first hour of 2017. And so one wonders about the impartiality of the system throughout.
Well, Macron has been accused before of trying to bring on a constitutional crisis, possibly even to prolong his time as president. Do you think we are at the beginning of a constitutional crisis here, John, and then Robert?
I think it's a constitutional crisis in the waiting. That it's been hanging around for a little while now, ever since, I suppose, the rise of Marine Le Pen, the rise of Le Rassemblement National in the last legislative elections, and the fact that 11 million people voted for her, and she was squeezed out by this parliamentary Republican bloc that formed that impeded her from coming to power. So there is a sense in France that constitutionally things are extremely fragile. And this kind of thing might just push the glass barrier right through and bring on some things which, well, the worst of which, of course, would be some kind of insurrection, but could be just generally an attitude on the part of the people and trade unions and an awful lot of things could block the whole country, let alone the system.
Yes, I agree with that. It's not too long ago that we had the Gilets jaunes coming out to demonstrate and to block roads and so on, and in a very nasty and even by British standards at least, indeed by French standards, a rather bloody confrontation between ordinary people and the authorities. And the sort of people who supported the Gilets jaunes are the sort of people who support Marine Le Pen and who feel that they are the people who are neglected and ignored by the system. We see this in every country now. People who feel that whatever they want and whatever they say, the people who believe they know best take no notice. And Marine Le Pen's strength was, I think, not so much in her own talents, as it were, or in her oratorical skills or her grip of economics, etc., but simply in the fact that she was the person who seemed to be best able to represent all the people who felt left behind and ignored. In that sense, of course, there is an obvious parallel with Trump and to some extent with Nigel Farage. Though I think in a way people had come to think that Marine Le Pen would be capable of being a reasonable president. Whether she would or not, we don't know. But this attempt to sabotage the whole process, as I said, forgive me for repeating myself, just seems to me to be a very dangerous development.
Looking at what's going to happen with Rassemblement National and the future, Marine Le Pen, let's say she's now out of the picture and there is no successful appeal and she isn't able to run. People point towards Jordan Bardella as the natural and likely successor. Who else is there, John, who might come up? Because, as people have said, Bardella might be a bit of a lightweight on the national stage.
Well, I mean, there is one scenario that you didn't mention that is a possibility for Marine Le Pen. I mean, she will definitely go to appeal, and that appeal won't take place before about a year to a year and a half. But there is another possibility, and that is, irony of ironies, is that Article 17 of the French Constitution allows the President of the Republic to pardon individuals. And there is talk of that at the moment, that Macron, in one of his last gestures, could be seen as the great saver of French democracy, saver from itself in a way, by pardoning Marine Le Pen and allowing her to stand in the presidential elections in 2027. But that's a bit of political fiction for the moment. But the other people that could stand are, for instance, Marine Le Pen's former partner, whose name is Louis Alliot, who is the mayor of Perpignan, where I'm sitting at the moment. And Louis Alliot is seen by many people as a very safe pair of hands, a very solid politician with a southern accent, who is close to the people, who knows how to run rather efficiently here a municipality. And so he might be a possibility. The second, of course, is a return of Marine Le Pen's niece, who would be Marion Maréchal, who has been off the scene for quite some time because she moved further to the right, or a different kind of right, a sort of more liberal economics right, whereas Marine Le Pen's right is much more central to the people and a kind of, in some people's eyes, a kind of socialism. So Marion Maréchal is a possible returner here. And she's already spoken out today, saying that she is utterly and totally behind her aunt.
And Marion Maréchal has had fallings out with her aunt in the past, I believe, Robert. And she represents, or she has represented, I should say, a more economically right-wing conservatism, as John says, but also far more of a Catholic conservatism than perhaps Marine Le Pen, who is very socially liberal after all. Would she mark a change in direction for RN?
Yes, I think she would. She's quite young and quite glamorous and quite an attractive figure in the superficial way that, after all, is not negligible in politics. But she does represent, I would say, one of the strands of French conservatism. There's a classic division of the French right into three strands, one of which is Catholic, one of which is nationalist, and one of which is parliamentary. And I suppose Marine Le Pen represents, in a sense, the nationalist strand. And her niece represents more the Catholic strand, but these are both present and have always been present in the right. And although France is a pretty secularized country, as Britain is, I don't think one can underestimate the influence, certainly a sort of, at least a vestigial influence of Catholicism for many people, especially outside the large cities. And I don't know whether John would think this is significant.
Yes, I mean, I'd add to that, as you say, France is a fairly secularized country, but there is a resurgence of people attending church, the number of people who want to be curé again, and as a result, really, not so much as belief in God, but identitarian politics, a kind of reaction to the rise of sort of Muslim politics, which are clearly evident everywhere. And you see this and hear about it from a number of people who themselves I've always thought of as being fairly secular, who now have started to attend church on a Sunday.
I suppose, Rod, similar to Muslims, Catholics, devout Catholics, tend to have a lot of children and have done for a long time, encouraged by government famille nombreuse policies. And maybe we're just seeing that beginning to express itself at the ballot.
Yes, perhaps you're right. I mean, there is there is a kind of recognizable kind of person in France. You can immediately say this person is a Catholic and this person probably has quite a few children. I don't think there's quite the equivalent of that. You know, you might say the sort of home counties Anglican type, but there is a strong cultural Catholicism, as John says, which may not be entirely theologically sound or active, but which does represent a whole set of values and of traditions. And under the stimulus of both, of globalization, of the obvious presence of Islam in France, and a sense that, values of the family are being weakened. I think that could be something that's bound to revive. How important it will get, we don't know. But it's as one element of a kind of rejection of the orthodox, liberal, progressive tendency that is happening, after all, in many countries. I think in France, Catholicism would be one aspect of that.
And John, you mentioned that Marion Maréchal went further to the right than Marine for a while and seems to have come back together with her aunt more recently. But somebody she aligned herself with was Eric Zemmour, who at the last presidential election was briefly thought to be a potentially very popular figure. It didn't really materialize. But he regarded Marine as, or still does regard Marine, I think, as too politically correct, wrong on economics, and an insufficiently radical figure for what France needs. Now that Marine has been scuppered, does that open up an opportunity for RN to become this more radical right-wing force that people like Zemmour and perhaps Marion have always wanted it to be?
I think it does open that possibility. And there are all sorts of things that are being discussed as a sort of knee-jerk reaction to this decision, but there are fragilities within the RN itself. There are wings in the RN. I mean, for instance, Jordan Bardella is far more liberal economics than Marine Le Pen. And if say, Zemmour and Marion Maréchal and Jordan Bardella could all get together in that famed idea of a union of the rights, then it could become quite a potent force at the next presidential elections. But even before that, there are all sorts of instabilities now that are beginning to break out. I mean, because there's big talk, of course, immediately that Marine Le Pen might take her revenge by overturning the government, which she is in a position to be able to do in the next week or so. And so you can see all sorts of things breaking out. And then perhaps just a small addition is the French amour-propre, their sort of pride about the reaction that is being provoked overseas. So you've probably seen that the Kremlin has already pronounced on this and said it is a denial of democracy. Viktor Orban has said, "Je suis Marine." And so it's the French look at that and they don't really like that. They feel hurt by it, that their democracy is not seen as a beacon internationally. And those kind of things, I think, impact all the way through. And how this will break out in itself is to be seen in the next month or so.
That's very interesting, Robert. Do you think, is it in the French character to react in support of the system as it exists, as a sort of, dislike of foreigners telling them that their country is ruined? Or is it likely to be an embarrassment and an attempt to change France from within?
Well, I think the French, like the British, are very inclined to extreme declinism and pessimism, and to say that everything's going wrong and that things are terrible, and that can either lead to a kind of cynical detachment from politics, or it can lead to a rather strong reaction. Um, I don't think one can say in this case, but the emergence all over Europe, of course, and indeed way beyond Europe, of what seems to be a growing undercurrent of dissatisfaction with the whole liberal and indeed democratic system among young people. And Le Pen's support is quite strong among the young, uh, um, is um, is something that can't just be, as it were, suppressed. It would be very foolish to say, well, now the Le Pen problem has gone away, and therefore France can get back to normal, because I'm not sure there's a normal to get back to.
And lastly, a question for you both. The fact that there is a European element to this case, so European Union funds, might that lead to a further anger towards the European Union on the populist right in France and the populist left, and a sense that the EU is part of the corrupt establishment that needs to be overturned?
Well, I think this could be an extra point. I mean, at the trial today, there was a representative, a lawyer for the European Union, who was present as a sort of partie civile, talking, and who at the end made a statement. I'm not sure how beneficial that is going to be to those people who are pro-European. But it will be seen as the EU intervening now through the courts in who gets to run as a politician in France. And it could have very, very negative effects for the EU lobby in France, which remains extremely strong, particularly amongst the sort of liberal elite, metropolitan liberal elites, and those people who are upper civil servants, not least those who are in Brussels who are French, but also closely in contact, because they're all in arc themselves, with those civil servants who are in France itself.
Robert, do you agree with that? Because you wrote quite a lot about it to do with Brexit, a sort of suspicion among the people that the European Union and the legal system are in cahoots to suppress their will.
Yes, I mean, I do agree with all that John said on that. The, France and Britain, or rather, are not unlike each other here. Indeed, if you go back to 2016, the EU was more unpopular in France than it was in Britain. And Macron said at the time he thought that if the French had been given a vote, they would have voted to leave. Well, that subsided partly because of the problems that Brexit seemed to be causing in Britain, or was causing in Britain. And I think there was a strong sense that you couldn't actually do much about it. You've got to accept it and make the best of it. But I think that the French, or at least many people in France, again, the sort of people I mentioned earlier, who feel themselves to be left behind and ignored, are not admirers of the EU and don't see the EU as their savior, but do see the EU as part of this establishment. And I think, as John says, I think people will be pretty annoyed to think that the EU is now, in some senses, taking part in France's judicial system, and is taking part in an attack on its most popular politician. Yes, I think it will have a big effect.
Robert and John, thank you very much for coming on to Spectator TV.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.